This is the year 2014. Today's date is May 12. I'm not exactly sure what time it is since I forgot my phone. What? Already? Damn, time really flies. So, Frank says it's 3 AM, but I think his clock is a little late. Regardless, this is a small French city of Albi. Nothing too fancy. The most remarkable spot in the city is this little public trash can who can always tell the exact time.
At the third stroke, it would be 3, 21, and 50 seconds.
See, Frank? I told you your clock was late, but you never listen! Also, I guess there's this church with something like the biggest monument in the world made with bricks or something, but who gives a damn? Talking trash can, that's where it's at. It's what all the kids are into. Needless to say, no one could have known that it is here, right in this very town, that a new hero will rise. A man destined to walk on the path of justice and awareness. He's the double yolk in your eggs. The one thumbs up that ruined an otherwise perfectly round number of likes in your YouTube videos. He is.
Find a job, you freaking weirdo!
Oh, hello, boss. So, how was your first patrol?
Well, not gonna lie, it didn't go very well. Turns out it's not that easy to become a superhero.
Oh, well, don't be too harsh on yourself. After all, you've just started this whole superheroing thing, and you weren't even trained properly. I mean, look at Batman here. Even he needed to train for almost a decade before being able to do anything. Hey, I tell you what, why don't you read it? Maybe it will give you some inspiration.
You know what? You may be right. I mean, I don't have any preparation of any sort. So I guess it shouldn't hurt to study the history of previous heroes.
You do know that all of them are fictional, right?
You know what? Stuffed version of me? That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm gonna study the history, lore, and mythos of the superheroes of the past, and once that's done, I will know everything there is to know about heroes.
Well, that's all fine and good, but who are you going to tackle first? Batman?
No. Since it's my first time, I think we need to go back even further, way before the creation of Batman.
So what, Superman?
No, even before that. I'm gonna study the very first superhero in the history of superhero. I'm gonna study... Zorro.
He's the very first?
Kinda.
Out of the night, when the full moon is bright, comes a horseman known as Zorro. This bold renegade climbs the sea with his blade, a Z that stands for Zorro.
But I don't quite understand. Does Zorro even qualify as a superhero? I mean, he doesn't have any power, or...
Well, that's because we need to define first what is and what's not a superhero. When you say superhero, you usually think of characters with abilities beyond those of normal people. You may also think of a few other tropes often associated with superheroism, like a secret identity or a handful of gadgets. But the thing is, for each one of these tropes, there is a counter-argument. None of the Fantastic Four have a secret identity, Batman doesn't have any superpower, and the Hulk is not really a big user of tools. As weird as it may sound, I think that the defining element for what is and what's not a superhero is, well, in the costume. Well, sort of. To be exact, I think that there needs to be a dichotomy between the character in his civilian form and his superheroic form, which doesn't necessarily lead to a secret identity. And Zorro does qualify here, as he's known both as Zorro, when in disguise, and as Don Diego de la Vega. However, he was not the first to do that. Another great example is the Scarlet Pimpernel, written by Emma Orczy, this lady. The story revolves around Sir Percy Buckney, aka the Scarlet Pimpernel, who constantly acts to protect several French aristocrats sentenced to the guillotine during the early stage of the French Revolution. Think of it as a Robin Hood, but at the service of the 1%. And he debuted in the play The Scarlet Pimpernel, who would later become a series of novels, in 1903, almost 2 decades before The Curse of Capistrano, who was first published in 1919. But he's not just trying to do some good like, say, Spider-Man or Callas. He doesn't want to use his abilities to serve the need of the many, but to accomplish a set goal, namely, saving a bunch of French nobles from Robespierre's regime. It's not a selfish goal by any means, but still. That's also why I didn't consider Christopher Sin or the Spring Hill Jack, the first one being more of an adventurer than a crime fighter, and the second one is more of a folklore creators, whose depiction varies from a rapist to an actual crime fighter. And while Zorro also has some personal reason for entering the realm of crime fighting, he is also fighting to, quote-unquote, avenge the helpless, punish cruel politicians, and aid the oppressed. Then again, it's just my own view. In fact, many people consider the Scarlet Pimpernel to be the very first superhero. But still, that's how it's gonna be here. To be eligible for the title of superhero, a character needs to 1. Have 2 distinct identities, so characters like Hercules or Benoît Brisefer, who are always referred as such, don't count. And 2. They must be seeking good, even if it means stepping aside of their personal task. With that out of the way, let's finally talk about the origins of one of the very first superheroes of all time. Zorro was originally created by Johnston McCulley in August 1919, when a 5-part series was published in the pulp magazine All Story Weekly, featuring the now infamous Zorro, who may have been inspired by the real-life outlaw Joaquin Muleta Calio, who was also known as the Robin Hood of El Dorado. Unsurprisingly, a lot of elements and characters were not in the book. For instance, Zorro didn't wear his infamous half mask, instead having a piece of silk covering his whole face, and his trademark Z carving was not nearly as prominent as it is now. The whole story revolves around the conflict between Zorro and the evil Captain Alamon, as well as the equally evil Sergeant Gonzalez, the latter being more or less the prototype for the Sergeant Garcia. And I'm not gonna lie, the book is extremely cheesy. Even then, I wouldn't say that the writing is really outdated. There is some aspect of the story that to this day I think are still interesting, like the fact that when the story begins, Zorro is already a well-known figure. In fact, it seems that he was around even before trouble started in the old California. And I also especially like the fact that even the reader don't know who Zorro is amongst all the characters in the book. Even though, to be honest, it is pretty freaking obvious. I'm pretty sure that even if you've never heard of Zorro even once, you'll guess who it is in a matter of chapter. But keep in mind that it is a pulp novel from the early 20th century, so a little bit of silliness is kinda expected. But the story raised enough interest to be later adapted in a silent movie, The Mark of Zorro, realized by Fred Niblo and starring Douglas Fairbanks. Now, it's pretty safe to say that this movie, as well as the portrayal of Fairbanks, probably had an influence at least as big as the original novel and the Zorro we know and love today. For example, the costume traded the previously mentioned piece of silk for the now classic half mask. Fittingly, the secret identity of Zorro is no longer kept secret to the audience. Which is a good thing, since I don't really see how you could expect your audience to not see past this disguise. Both Don Diego and Zorro were also changed. To really unlikable and pompous in the book, Diego became a little more kindly spirited in the movie. Also, Zorro's goal became much more extreme, since he now wants the government in charge to simply disappear. Whereas in the book, he merely wants them to stop being so damn obviously evil. Thanks to the overwhelming success of the movie, Macaulay was asked to produce new adventures for Zorro, which he did. At the cost of some continuity issue, since the ending of the Curse of Capistrano had Zorro unmasked and he's mid-dead, yet it's not the case in the sequels. Huh, weird. Since Zorro's story rarely have a true continuity within each other, there isn't really an incentive to add new elements to the story, since most of the time, it will be a retelling of the same story rather than an expansion of an already established universe. In fact, Zorro's story usually falls into two categories. Either the regular Zorro adventures, with Don Diego as the main lead, or about a younger character taking the name of Zorro, usually with Don Diego as a mentor-like figure. A good example being the fairly decent The Mask of Zorro of '98. But it usually follows something like this. Zorro is usually a young lad from old California, studying in Spain, who, when returning to his home, discovers that the land is now ruled by an evil mayor/governor. More often than not, the main antagonist is not the same between each installment. But most of the time, it's some kind of corrupted politician that forced Don Diego into becoming the defender of those who are in need. Zorro's arsenal usually consists of a rapier, a bullwhip that he usually uses as a grappling hook, and in the first novels he was also carrying a pistol. And while he's not that big when it comes to brute force, he compensates with his swordsman and acrobatic skills, as well as being a master tactician. He can also rely on his faithful horse Tornado, or sometimes a different white horse called Phantom, which means that he's quite literally the Phantom's rider. His most common outfit include a black sombrero cordobés, a hat traditionally worn in Andalusia, a domino mask, and a black costume, as well as a black cape. Strangely enough, even though his name is a Spanish word for fox, he doesn't really have anything fox-related in his appearance. In some of Macaulay's work, Zorro also have a band of disciples at his command, but that's something that most recent stories tend to write off. Other supporting characters include Bernardo, the mute servant of Zorro, who, depending on the story, is sometimes deaf, but other times he merely pretends to be deaf, in order to fool people into being less suspicious about him. There's also the infamous Sergeant Demetrio Lopez Garcia, who, as I stated before, is more or less the successor to Sergeant Gonzalez, as the secondary antagonist. The ironic twist with Garcia is that, even though his main goal is to finally capture Zorro and bring him to justice, he is also at the same time a close friend to Don Diego. Ironically though, since the main antagonist is almost never the same guy, he is also more prominent and more memorable than most mayor/governor that Zorro had to face. While Zorro's still a big part in the collective imaginary, it's actually been some time since a real new retelling of the story. The last book ever written was the fairly loved by fans Zorro by Isabel Allende, who is actually an origin story, and the last really big Zorro movie was the pretty disappointing sequel to The Mask of Zorro, The Legend of Zorro, in 2005. There was also an animated series called Zorro Generation Z, set in a dystopian future, and yeah, you've probably already guessed what everybody compared this to. Generation Z obviously suffered from the comparison to Batman Beyond, which in the end is kinda ironic, since Batman itself is strongly inspired by Zorro's mythos. Whether it's the black color scheme, the butler as the main supportive cast, the protagonist being very wealthy, the idea of a hero trying to clean his city of crimes, Batman has almost as much to do with Zorro as he has to do with the movie The Bat by Roland West. And since Batman has been an incredible influence for so many superheroes that came after him, it's pretty safe to say that Zorro is a major staple for the modern superheroes. I mean, can you imagine how different the whole genre of superheroes will be without Batman? So, at the end of the day, while Zorro may not be the most popular superhero to this day, in fact you can argue that he may not even be the first superhero, you can deny that the guy had a major influence in how superheroes are portrayed even to this day. And I sincerely hope that somewhere down the line, someone will take a chance to revisit this tale once more.